Today I have Erwin Dekker as a guest. He has written a PhD on the Viennese students of civilization. This book, and Erwin, welcome.
Thank you.
And what's so special about Vienna?
Well, I always think about it this way. There's a movie by Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris, and it allows people to travel back to the period that is the most exciting for their field, and I think in economics, but more broadly in the social sciences. Vienna, especially during the interwar period, is the place you want to visit. It's the place where modern psychology starts with Freud and Gustav Jung. It is the place where philosophy becomes modern through the Vienna Circle and its logical positivism. And it's also the birthplace of three economic schools: the Austro-Marxist school, the mathematical economics school, and the Austrian school of economics. And it's the Austrian school of economics that is central in my book. And the book talks about the relation between Vienna and the Austrian school of economics in three ways. Firstly, it talks about how Vienna as a place has influenced their work. Secondly, it talks about how they think as economists about culture, which of course is a bit strange because as economists they should primarily be concerned about markets, but I argue that they're really concerned with this broad theme of culture and civilization. And then thirdly, I detail how they respond to the crisis of civilization that is first brought about through socialism, they argue, and then secondly through the rise of fascism in the 1930s. So it's these three things that the book does and that I want to talk about today a little bit as well. Yeah? So the first thing is Vienna and what makes the place so special. And what makes it so special is something that is perhaps best regarded as an obstacle, and that is that the university doesn't function all that well. So it doesn't hire many Jews anymore in the interwar period. It is somewhat old-fashioned, so there are lectures that are poorly attended, that just have the lecturer talking for very long without much interaction with the students. But the interaction takes place somewhere else, and that's in the Viennese circles. Some historians argue that there were more than 100 of these intellectual circles in Vienna, right? But they date back even to the end of the 19th century, but it's really in the interwar period that they blossom like never before. They blossom in the arts, they blossom also very much in economics, and they blossom in philosophy, where you have the most famous of the circles, which is called the Vienna Circle, right? And that is where logical positivism starts, which is a very empiricist, a very universalist conception of science that regards that all human knowledge can be basically organized around common sets of principles related to logic and mathematics. And the Viennese students of civilization, or the Austrian school of economics, is in part a response to this Vienna Circle. They form their own circle. The most important of those circles is the Miseskreis, around Ludwig von Mises, who also doesn't have an official chair at the university, but works at what is there, the Chamber of Commerce. It's a very prestigious post, but it's again one not in the academic world. And he brings all his students together. There's students from philosophy, from history, from economics too, and he brings them together in this Miseskreis, which forms a very strong own identity. An identity that's emphasized through and celebrated through songs. So there's a songbook of the Miseskreis with over 20 songs. And many of the older members, when they were in their 70s or in their 80s, they could still sing these songs and sort of transfer back to this period. And what made it so special. Hayek forms his own circle that is more concerned with young people. It's called the Geistkreis, so again, very much intellectual. Some people have also said that Vienna is very much the city of the mind, right? Also think of psychology as the birthplace of psychology with Freud. And all these circles form their own identities, and they oppose one another, they compete with one another, but most importantly, they partly overlap, right? So there's a kind of competition and collaboration. An economist would say this is a creative cluster, right? Like Silicon Valley is today, or Eindhoven in the Netherlands, but it's where they compete and collaborate at the same time, and which creates this enormous intellectual flourishing, right? But it also has consequences for the content. of the work that is done in Vienna. It is never quite restricted by academic disciplines, right? So for example, if you think about England, there's already really a sense of what economics is, right? Alfred Marshall did much to make it into a professional subject, which is then pursued by his generations of students. But in Vienna, nothing of the sort exists. Economics is still housed in the law faculty, and it's still considered a sort of historical science, also influenced by the old German conception that economics is really a historical science. And so they're still engaged in a lot of conversations that are not narrowly economic, but that are very broad. They're historical, they're about society, and they're also about their own times, right? So they reflect very much upon the developments in Vienna and Europe more broadly. And this character of knowledge makes them very different. So where in modern economics you see almost atomized individuals maximizing utility, instead the Viennese argue, no, it's heterogeneous individuals who pursue their own plans. And they often fail. They're often sometimes misguided plans. And most importantly, they're often poorly coordinated plans, right? So there's no sense that all of these plans necessarily succeed. So there's a sense that everybody is a bit of an entrepreneur trying to realize his own plans. They're all different. And so the central problem for them is one of coordination, right? Vienna is also the birthplace of modern game theory, which is all about strategic behavior and how different individuals interact with one another through strategic endeavors. And their economics is a bit like that, right? It thinks of individuals as very different and strategizing against one another. And so they're interested in this process of coordination. And this is where the theme of civilization comes in, right? Because they regard this coordination issue very, very broadly. And they basically say, and Hayek is the most prominent to argue this, that culture is a form through which human beings cooperate with one another. And they don't cooperate directly, like saying, let you come in on my plan and then we do this together. No. We remain the heterogeneous individuals with all our individual plans, and somehow we have to find a way through which we can all realize our own plans. Now for that we need a bit of a shared structure, but within that shared structure we are all free to do what we want to do. Yeah? And that shared structure, they argue, one example of that is language, right? So language allows us to communicate, it allows us to interact, but it doesn't force us, of course, to say the same thing or something of the sort. The same thing they argue about law, right? And they are very strong on a sort of historical conception of law. In England, they would call it the common law tradition, but this comes more out of the German historical idea that all institutions, including law, have evolved over time so as to fit modern society best. So law is another one of these institutions. And then there is Menger, the founder of the Austrian economists, says it's money, right, which you could sort of regard as the language of the market. But in Hayek, more broadly, it become market prices. So they are the way in which all these individual plans are coordinated, right? So it's a process of coordination, and civilization, as I define it in the book, but they use the word a lot, is a set of cooperative practices, almost a sort of technology of cooperation that has historically grown. Now, why do we have to be in interwar Vienna to study this, right? Why not somewhere else? And what is fascinating about this period is that this idea comes under attack, or the very civilization they have studied, they argue, comes under attack. And it comes under attack from two sides at the same time, which makes them sort of stuck in the middle, right? So it comes under attack from the right side, the romantic right side, which argue all this civilization is just a set of artificial constraints on human freedom, and we should really let the true individual come out, the authentic self, right? Freud's early theories are an important inspiration for this type of idea, right? He says that you're just overburdened with guilt, and all this burden, you just have to throw it off and let your unconscious desires come out, because otherwise you will just crop up frustration and anger and sexual desire. And from the left, there's another type of attack that says all these historically grown cultural practices, they're simply outdated, right? Tomorrow, when we record this at least, There's going to be a royal wedding. Now, a royal wedding, that's such an outdated cultural practice. Why should we pay any attention to this? And from the left, they really argue that this should be the end. This should be the end of all these old historical practices. We should replace it with a better set of institutions and a better morality that allows us to truly collaborate and not merely this poor coordination game that we're playing. Right? And so the Austrian economists, I argue, seek to steer between these two extremes. Right? So the extreme on the left that says we should reconstruct morality and a superior form of morality and culture, and the people on the right that says we should throw off culture. Yeah? And by doing so, they sort of say on the right they believe in the natural, on the left they believe in the artificial or the artifactual, and we here in the middle believe in the cultural. So that which has already proven itself. Right? And this is how they start to defend markets and cultural institutions more broadly. They are historically grown. They contain a lot of wisdom, right? So they have proven themselves. We might not fully understand how they work, but they have proven themselves over time. And this gives them a kind of strange perspective, and this is where the third word in the title of my book, the Viennese students of civilization, comes in, and it's the student part. Right? They really position themselves somewhat curiously, if you think about it intellectually. They say, yeah, we should study how society already functions, how solutions are already found by these individuals working with one another. Right? How coordination already takes place, how language has evolved, how markets have evolved over time. That is what we should study. We shouldn't think that we're in a position of superiority, that we know how the economy works. No, instead we're watching culture grow before our eyes, and our main purpose is to understand how that has come about. Right? So the very student, it's a kind of humble intellectual position, right? You don't say, I'm the expert and I know how we should improve this, but I am the student and I'm learning from the world out there. There's a similar perspective in biology where you study animal behavior to find sort of smart solutions, for example, how to recycle or how to be green. There's a small branch of biology, but they argue that this is the main perspective we should take in the economy. And Hayek in his later work especially argues because the economy is such a complex system that we can never fully grasp it. So our knowledge of it is always limited. Right? And this creates the student perspective, which is really alien to modern economics. Right? Because in modern economics there's very much a sense that you can construct society. Right? So to go back to the intellectual atmosphere at the time, right, from the left there's an attack saying we can do a lot better. From the right says we should really throw off all these, the yoke of civilization, and there they are, sort of stuck in the middle. They don't really know what to do. They're losing the political fight. They have never done really well, the liberals in Vienna, but by the 1930s they really realized that they have lost the intellectual fight and that they've also lost the political fight. So then slowly but surely they start to write more political books. They move away from the mere student perspective and they move to what I call a guardian or a shepherd perspective. Right? They say, no, we should foster this culture and we should think about how we best do it. So at that point in the book I draw in one of the famous philosophers from Vienna, Karl Popper, who writes a book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. And the title is just so wonderful because it captures so well the feeling that a greater group of Austrian liberals have, right? That they are trying to defend an open society, but it's attacked from all sides by enemies, and they seek how they can best defend it. And they do so after the war in a new institution, which is the Mont Pelerin Society, which is a sort of international organization of liberals trying to revive the old liberal tradition, but also to seriously consider how it could have been that this natural liberal progression of the 19th century came to a halt. So what led to the criticism from the left and the right gaining so much support and becoming so popular? Right? And it's this transformation that is crucial in the latter half of the book. Yeah? So that is my story about Vienna. I think it offers a set of powerful messages about today. Economists are once again in the process of defining themselves as engineers, A set of very prominent economists are doing this at the moment. And it's basically a sort of lesson in humility, right? That human beings in the society and in the economy in particular know quite well what they're doing. And our first intellectual reflex should always be, if we don't understand why they're doing something, to better understand why it might make sense what they're doing, instead of saying, no, they're irrational or they're doing something that's stupid and we should step in to improve it. But the book, I hope, also is just a story about Vienna, right? About perhaps the most wonderful intellectual period of the 20th century, and how economists were at the very heart of it, right? And how they were part of this big conversation about the big themes, about civilization, about liberalism, about the future of the West, right? And I hope that my book illuminates that a little bit.
Thank you very much, Erwin, for this fascinating story about this fascinating period in history, the history of Vienna and the roots of the Austrian School of Economics. Erwin was talking about his PhD, this book, The Viennese Students of Civilization.
Thank you very much, Lex.